Welcome in, everyone. Thank you all for coming to the event. I'm Elizabeth, and I'll be your host for today's session. My speakers should be coming on now as well.
How's it going, Elizabeth?
Hello, welcome Federico, Joey, and Joy, who should be turning on soon. Hi, everyone. So the topic of this roundtable today is going to be about presenting your design work for stakeholder buy-in. And as you all have probably experienced if you're here, and something I've mentioned on social media is that the reality of the design work that we do is that part of it is doing the design work, and part of it is explaining why we should be allowed to do our design work. And so today we're going to be talking about the latter, and specifically centered around three main things dealing with that presentation. So we're going to be diving into definition of stakeholders, preparation and presentation, and results. So before we get started, I want to introduce you to myself and my panel of wonderful speakers. My name is Elizabeth Alley, and I'm a senior product designer and a founder. I have, in my previous life, I was a classical pianist and a teacher, and I have been working in product design for 14 years now, and mostly on SaaS products and B2B and B2C products in Silicon Valley. I've bootstrapped and exited 3 of my own startups, and I have run a design agency for 10 years. Currently, I'm the founder of Designer Up School, where I teach UX and UI and product design with a mindful approach. Here we also have Joy. Joy, you're up next.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Joy Liu. I've been a UX designer for more than a decade now, working at various companies from startup to super big global companies. And then I've also jumped around between consumer products to enterprise products. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Besides that, my part-time gig is I teach interaction design at California College of the Arts. Previously, I was also teaching interaction design at my alma mater, Art Center in SoCal. A little bit about me as a designer. I'm always looking for ways to collaborate and innovate with my fellow colleagues. So I'm always like running workshops, brainstorms, sketch sessions. And I'll tell you in a second why that's important in getting stakeholder buy-ins. And then other than that, I'm also going to do a shout out to introverts in the room, if there's any, right? I think after this group mentor session, I'm just going to go like hide under a rock, right? Because this is going to take a lot of energy out. But with that said, like as an introvert, you can still have the skill set to convince your stakeholders when you're presenting your designs. All right, and then next, I'm going to pass the baton to Joey.
Thanks, Joy. And not to be mistaken with Joy, my name is Joey. I am a UX designer currently at Manulife Financial. I have been working in the field for about 5 years now. Previous to my current job, I got to work with the Canadian government, doing an exciting thing, introducing Agile, introducing design into a space that wasn't quite familiar with it. And then previously, before that, I was working in sales and consulting and have brought a lot of skill sets from that industry over to the way that I design now. I am very interested in storytelling, design collaboration, so working with other designers as well as non-designers, in workshops, things like that, as well as content strategy. And I try to include a little bit of those things in the way that I design. And I'm super excited to chat with everyone today. I'm just going to pass it over now. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Federico Francioni here. Please call me Fede. That's what I go for. I like to say that it's like FedEx without the X. Originally born and raised in Italy, I've been following my American dream, and I've been living in Silicon Valley since 2013. Right now, I'm a principal experience designer at Meta, the company that used to be called Facebook one time, if you remember. It was 2021, fun times. I like to call myself a designologist because I combine a little bit of the service design skill. What else? I am definitely on the extrovert spectrum, just to connect with the other panelists. But don't worry, even if you're an extrovert, you can totally mess up any sort of readout and stakeholder buy-in. So let's take care even of the extrovert ones.
Love it. Thank you, guys. So yes, thank you so much for, coming on, spending this time, sharing your knowledge with everyone. Thank you, everybody that's posting in the chat where you guys are coming from and where you're hanging out right now. And as we go, post your questions freely about the challenges that you're facing in presenting your work or things that are going on in, getting buy-in and your designs in your organizations, and we'll be happy to answer. And we'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A so you can ask the speakers your questions directly. So the goal really of presenting our work, I would say, is usually about getting buy-in, right? It's about reaching consensus or at best compromise in order to move things forward, right? That's kind of the best that we can hope for, and that's really what we're trying to do as we present. So being designers is part of this kind of larger mechanism that's bringing these products and these solutions to life. I think the fundamental thing we're going to explore today is how can we use our presentation and communication skills to move things forward. So I want to start by presenting a question to the panel, and that is, how do you all define stakeholders and their expectations, and why is it important to do that? Who wants to take it first?
Well, I can go for it. I think that whenever you are gathering with someone, you should have a clear understanding of, otherwise, why are you even having that meeting, right? So you know why you invited those people to the meeting, and you should have like clear expectation of what you're like getting from them. If it's a design review or anything else, you know why they got it. Like, is it someone from like the business side that needs to give you the stamp of approval? Is that someone from the tech side that wants to give you some sort of limitation of what the UI can or can't do? So you have to be extremely tactical and intentional in knowing like who are you inviting to the table and what do you want to get out of them, because you are sitting at the table already.
Yeah, definitely. I think, anyone, in terms of defining a stakeholder, really anyone that has direct interest in that project, right? Anyone that can significantly affect or be affected by what you're working on could be considered a stakeholder. But then I think there are different levels of stakeholders too. And one of the tools that I like to use sometimes is stakeholder mapping. If I'm not sure, and if I want to help prepare myself for being as relevant as I can to the person that I'm talking to. So Joy, Joey, do you have any thoughts about that? How do you kind of define who you're talking to and how you should speak to them at the start when you're, working on a project?
Sure, I can start that one. Sorry, Joey, you can go first next. For me, my model is also understanding who's involved and what are they doing, right? Why are they involved? So a tool that's really helpful would be the RACI chart, RACI, and then that's to help map out the roles and responsibilities, right? So I think I can post a link in the chat later, but basically is to help you understand who is responsible, right? And then usually that's people who's doing the actual thing. So engineers, designers, right? Who is accountable, and then who needs to be consulted and who needs to be informed, right? So as you go higher up the level, then you can see, okay, those higher up level people may not need to be actually doing the work themselves, but you should definitely let them know about the design decisions and choices, right? Otherwise they will become a blocker. All right, I'm done. Joey, please go ahead.
Thanks, Joy. Yeah, just going off of that, I think there are like various ways that you can like define your stakeholders and expectations. But I want to go back to Federico's initial point, which is knowing who needs to be at the table and who you're bringing in and why. Sometimes it's I find it helpful to visualize with that stakeholder mapping, but I often start off with just, okay, in order for me to move this project ahead, who do I need to go ahead from? Who needs to be here? Who needs to know what's going on and at what level? And it just starts as simple as listing people out. And if I don't know who to go to, I would refer to someone else who does. So maybe a product owner or product manager or someone who's just been on the project a lot longer than you do, that you have, speaking to them and then getting those names. And then from there, defining who they are. So maybe it's just setting up meetings with those individuals, figuring out what do you do like here with the project, with the company, and trying to understand their goals and how you can align what you're doing with what they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly the same approach. And I think what Joy was talking about with the RACI chart and stakeholder mapping, it kind of looks something like this, right? Usually, most stakeholders can kind of fall into one of these four categories. You know, on the spectrum over on the right top corner, you have manage closely. So these are kind of the ones that are more high power and mostly they're highly interested people. Sorry, for those of you just joining, if you could mute your mics for now, just while we're going through the speakers. Thank you so much. Yes, so the ones that are really highly interested and high powered, you really want to engage them the most, right? They're going to need the most effort in terms of satisfying them with your presentation, right? So you're going to want to focus on them and make sure they're getting the context and fidelity that they need. And then you have the keep satisfied group, right? So you put in just enough work here with them to keep them satisfied, but not so much that they're going to get bored with your message. And then you've got the low power, highly interested people. These are great because they're really ones that can become allies for you. They're very interested, even though they may not have a lot of decision-making power. So, keep them adequately informed, bring them on as allies, that sort of thing. And we're going to talk more about that a little bit later in the presentation. Then we have more of the low power, less interested people. And these are the ones you just kind of want to monitor, maybe get loose feedback from, but you don't want to bore them with like excessive communication about things. And that may be some engineers that are not directly involved yet because these features aren't on the product roadmap, things like that. So this can be a pretty useful tool in helping with that. So in terms of kind of finding allies, as I was talking about, what advice do you all have about that? And how do you do that as you prepare to present your presentation or your designs?
I can go first here, if that's okay. Yeah, awesome. So this was something that we actively had to do when I was working with the government. So my project with the Public Service Commission of Canada was basically me, a UX designer, a developer, and a product manager. The three of us were tossed into this government environment that was very new to Agile and designers as well as product managers. So when we came in, there was a lot of one-on-ones and it would be constant. So once we had to find those stakeholders and figured out, okay, like who do we need to manage closely, like who do we need to keep satisfied, all of the things over here. From there, finding those allies, so having those consistent one-on-ones. For me as the designer, what that meant was the developers that I worked really close with, the business folks that I worked close with, I would check in with them before things got too high fidelity. And from there, it would sometimes just be like a quick, like, hey, like let's chat for 5 minutes. I'm thinking about doing this thing, kind of wanted your input. And the more you get to have these interactions, the more you're building these relationships along things. And so by the time that we had a stakeholder panel, which was usually 30 to 40 people, before that would happen, we would check in with folks like in smaller groups or one-on-one, kind of get an AOK, so that by the time we have the full meeting, everyone has already given their AOK individually and everything is already at that point.
to come up in the first page.
Hi, everyone.
You
If
know how
you're
much the
joining,
charge
could you mute your mic,
will
please?
you buy
Can you
now?
just check that your mic is set to red and it's muted? I think we're getting a little bit of feedback from a few people. Thank you all. And thank you, Joey. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. That's really those one-on-ones that are really important. And Joy, I think you had a great term for this where you talked about that. I'd love you to kind of introduce everyone to that.
Yeah, that sounds good. So I think another point besides one-on-one is if you know that you're going into a stakeholder review, right, such as a design review, you know who needs to sign off on your design, for example, the director. And then if you can have a one-on-one with this person, right, understanding what are their pain points, how do they usually perceive, like how can they be convinced, right? That's a good way to discover that. And then the other way is maybe you can ask other people who work with that director, right, to see, okay, how does this person usually review things? What are their preferred format, right? How do they like to get the presentation done? Are they a talker, right? Do we need to do they stop you frequently during the presentation? Or perhaps sometimes even, right? Are they kind of like the skeptical people who needs a lot more data? Like, are they data-driven decision maker? Are they more on the edge technical side? By asking those questions, it can really help understand who do you need to build around you to support your case, right? So for example, if this design director is data-driven and whatever design you present, right, they want to see some sort of analytics backing up, then your best friend and your allies would be people on the analytics team, right? Maybe could be researchers who's running quantitative studies for you, right? And then thanks, Elizabeth, for calling me out on this method. And I'm kind of calling it the drip irrigation, right? Like, for example, this is a way for you to take care of your plants, right? You don't just pour water on all the plants and then just bombard them with like a flood, right? You kind of just you build the hose into the soil and then you just drip into the soil itself to keep it moist. And I would say it's like the same thing when you're running or designing for a project, right? You need to be constantly engaged with everyone around you, right? Giving them some drips here and there so that you know who to build up, and then they will become your allies over time because you've already established this communication, you've already established this trust, right? So that when you're all in the meeting together presenting to this director, everyone will come to support you in your concept because everyone already understands what you're trying to do, and then you have a shared vision.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think essentially as well. Hi, Amy, can you unmute? Thank you. I know it should be muted on when you come in, but sometimes you have to just hit that button. Thank you all. So yeah, as Joy was saying, essentially, especially like in remote work, it's just kind of back channeling your idea, right? Like constantly presenting little pieces of it, shopping your idea to the stakeholders ahead of time. And I think when you do that and you get that verbal buy-in along the way, presenting becomes a lot less of like defending your decisions and a little bit more formality, right? You're kind of just getting that whole concept together, presenting it to everyone, and it's a lot less, I think, stressful when you do it that way. So drip irrigation, everybody. I love that term, Joy. And Federico, any thoughts about that as far as like getting allies and getting support along the way?
To make everyone aware of something that is called, I don't know if you ever heard the term, but it's called the HIPPO in the room. And HIPPO is an acronym that was created by the fantastic group called the Corporate Rebels. I am gonna share the link in the chat in a second. But the HIPPO is acronym that stands for 8 person in the room. And there's always a bias. It's called the authority bias towards that person. So whenever you have a HIPPO in the room, you'll see, you might have found an HIPPO in your room, and you'll see how everyone seems to be always listening just for what that person is saying, or like the feedback that this person is giving are more important than probably yours or other people. So it's important that you also learn how to navigate the presence of the HIPPO in the room. and be aware that it exists, especially as you have that director, might be the hippo, I mean, right, that Joey was mentioning, and it's a good way to think about it. So beware of the hippo and go well with the irrigation. It's a good approach.
I like that. I think it's easy to remember too. The hippo and drip irrigation. We got it, right? These are great keywords. All right, so the next question I have is, and we have a great comment by Rosie Way. She says, build stakeholder personas so we can prepare the presentation that cater to them and get the buy-in. Exactly. If you're doing stakeholder mapping and you really want to employ some of the things that Joy talked about, which is figuring out like their love language in terms of communicating to them, and what Joey was talking about is like, you know, are they into the data? Like, what are they really more focused on? What kind of communication style is best for them? Do personas for your stakeholders and keep in mind, you know, the mapping and who the hippos are and how to drip to them appropriately. So the next question to the panel is, how do you prepare and present designs for, you know, your design concepts? In terms of, you know, the actual deliverables and kind of the presentation, the slides, what are some of your tricks and tactics for that?
I can go first.
I prep. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Joey. You're up first.
You go.
Thanks. So I think this really depends on who the stakeholder is, but often I find that the types of stakeholders that I'm presenting to prefer things that are really high level. And so slides that I show would have like very minimal text, and like it would be like one sentence. Get the point across. Okay, here's the next point. And always starting with like the background, so giving some context. Here's why we're here today. Like you may already know, but you want to bring people back. There are multiple meetings a day. It's just a nice refresher. And then from there, here like is the initial problem, also one sentence. And then when presenting things, highlighting it instead of just putting it in front of their faces, because you as the designer would know why you decided on certain things and why your decisions, like where it had come from. But for your stakeholders, they might not quite know that. And so just pointing out like different highlights, any research that you put into it. I like to use a lot of visuals and representations for things like that, just so we don't lose that attention. So those are just a couple of tips for presenting your design concepts that have worked for me. And sorry, Federico, you can go ahead.
No reason to apologize here. I try to be very mindful of what kind of feedback I want to gather, and so I try to understand since the very beginning when I want to get those. So I'll try to organize the timing of the presentation to say, hey, you can interrupt me anytime. If this is an audience that is respectful, I can go with the flow because I know them. Because I do find that real-time questions are the best, especially when you're discussing a flow. Or if I know that this is an audience that might be even a little bit more senior or might be not well adversed to looking at design, I ask them to wait for me to finish. Because in that case, I found that people tend to jump in. It's very natural. Every human being, when they see something, they're like, especially if they're extroverted like me, they will go, oh, yeah, I want to talk. And you want to make sure that you channel their being extrovert and you sit them on a bench for a second so they can see and listen to everything that you have to say. Because most likely, you're probably telling what they expect to know in the next 5 seconds, and they're not wasting anybody's time.
Yeah, absolutely true. Know your audience is definitely the first step. I think, you know, if you are not presenting to a design team, chances are they don't care about design principles, right? Usually that's not going to mean much to them. And so you really need to speak about it on what I kind of call their value terms, right? Whether that's OKRs to a product manager or that's KPIs to an exec or a marketing team, figuring out that first is so important. And like for me, I will oftentimes like redline my decks in different ways, or my mock-ups if I'm doing them for devs versus if I'm doing them for marketers and stuff like that. So you're going to speak about it really differently. Like I'm not going to go in there and saying the visual hierarchy on this page is best practice for users. It's just not usually going to sell it to them. They're just not going to relate. So saying something more like, you know, doing my research ahead of time and saying, if engagement is a priority right now, then I think, you know, we need to make this part of the design a priority right now. And this is what's going to potentially reduce the churn, or this is what's going to get more people down the funnel. And things like that just make them realize, okay, this makes sense for the business. And this is something that's low effort for the engineers. And that way it's kind of like, hey, this all makes sense on a lot of different levels. So I think, you know, whenever I am kind of doing any kind of presentation, there's always these kind of 3 questions that I want to make sure I balance, especially if you're doing it for more of a general audience. It's how can this design make the engineers' jobs easier? How can I de-risk the design investment for the company? And how can my designs just enhance parts of the product that will bring the most value to the users? So I think if you can answer those and frame them relevantly to the right stakeholder, you're winning. Any thoughts on that, Joy?
Yeah, so just to add on to what everyone else is saying, my 3 questions is similar to Joey's. It's what's your point, right, for this design? Why is this design important? And what is the impact of this design? And depending on your audience, the importance and impact can either be in engineering terms, right? So level of effort, or it could be in business terms if you're presenting up to your directors, VPs, or SVPs, right? Then that's what they really care about. They don't really care about a button placement at the end of the day, or unless they're detail oriented, right? But they care about what does that button do, and then why is that button important to exist on the product. I would love to segue a little bit and talk about the presentation part. I think also depending on your audience, I think at the end of the day, it's all about storytelling. So it could be a prototype, right, that you built in Figma. It could be a mix of showing design screenshots paired with research insights you got, right? Like here's a screenshot. Here are some of the quotes we pulled from our research. I've done hardware like appliance UX before, and then it's all about building proof of concepts where you're just trying to hack things together. And then that's like the most fun part of the process to me is how do you bring a concept to life without really building the concept itself, right? Because and then at that point, it's just endless possibilities, right? You can build your wireframes from a PowerPoint slide, right, and still sell the idea. You don't really have to go full-fledged Figma, right? As long as you can just sell it, convince someone, and they give you the green check mark for you to move on to the next step, then I think you've done your buy-in job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that storytelling part is so important. And really, it's just like doing it very simply, right? Remove that jargon, use very simple scenarios, and like pull analogies from common everyday occurrences and those universal experiences along with your prototype. Like that problem that people are having that you're trying to solve, make it very simple for everyone to understand. And I think part of that comes with checking in on that baseline understanding. Sometimes I will just start off my presentations with kind of open-ended questions a little bit to see where everyone is in their understanding of what we're trying to solve here, right? I think that just that energy of like really inviting people in to be a part of it, and with that storytelling, making it more visceral, making it connect more to people is important. And I think that's done just by being really simple. Just really, you know, take out all of the complexity of it. And I think that's what we're kind of good at doing as designers. So how else do you guys provide context about your designs and kind of talk about them in simple ways? Any thoughts on that?
I personally found out that it's helpful starting the conversation describing the thought process to do this way is because of, right? So you're giving a little bit of a glimpse inside the research. Some people still believe that design is mostly, art and craft, and there's a lot of science behind it. There is a lot of data, especially when it's like well-made design. So always driving with especially in the crucial part, anticipating the question is always a good way to give in that context. I also wanted to add that one thing that I'm still practicing quite a lot, but I've seen pretty well, is I tend to nurture and irrigate the people in the audience or in the room with me by being very vocal every time there is a yes and there is an agreement, and every time there is some sort of feedback or even disagreement from my side, I stopped saying no. I just don't say no, because people will understand that you have a challenge, or you're countering, or you're just understanding better their point of view. So I'm forcing myself, never say no, but whatever you either yes and, that is a very practical practice from design thinking that we also should embrace, or just the fact that you are going straight with your question, they will understand and will make them in a better mood. Because I've seen people just closing it up a little bit, especially if they're a little bit more introvert, like they're already coming out of the shell and saying something. And if you shut it up with no, then you're going to a little bit more difficult to convince. You're on mute, Elise.
Can you repeat that last part, Federico? I think you went a little bit dark for a second there.
Sorry, I apologize. Yeah, I've seen there's some issue with my connection. I hope I paid my bill. But well, I was trying to say that especially if someone is more of an introvert and they made that effort of coming out of the shell and provide you with some feedback, if you tend to shut them down with saying, oh no, because we already thought about that, or we went through it, so you tend to be a little bit too sharp in the answer, you're going to lose those people. You're going to lose the opportunity to make them an ally, because they will go back and sit and never say anything else. That's bad. Or you might have made an enemy.
Yes, that is so important. I think being able to read the room and come in with the right energy is very important. And what you said, yes, and that mindset of yes, and instead of no, but, or, is so important, because you can say the exact same thing. And I have done it in the exact same situation where just the way I've said it and the tone, they say tone is 40% of, what people hear when you say something. And that's a lot. So if you go into it with that, you can really drop people's defenses and get them to be more receptive to what you're saying. If you just agree and then have more of a, well, why do you think this would be better this way? Or, could you give me an example of something that you've seen in which not having the button this color or not placing it here would be better than what I've suggested? And normally either they get too tired to respond, or they end up agreeing with you, or maybe you find that they actually have a better solution. But either way, again, that moving forward is what we're aiming for, and that's usually a good way to get it. But as soon as you shut it down, you have no chance anymore of getting through. It's very difficult at that point to change someone's mind than it is to just kind of agree on the onset and then work towards a good compromise, or at least draw out some more meaning behind what they're saying, right? Joey, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I'll start. First of all, I love that, right? And I think, Elizabeth, your prompt of, hey, do you have an example of that, is such a great way to just keep the conversation going. And just thinking back, in some of my previous projects, there's been some people that they kind of act kind of mean during stakeholder reviews, right? Or sometimes they shut you down when you're doing presentation. And I think sometimes it's just kind of in the moment, but you shouldn't be discouraged to reach out to them and just being friendly and being curious and be like, hey, I really want to hear what you have to say. And that's a really interesting point. Do we have any real data or examples I can see, right? And then maybe they can then pull up their data to you and you're like, great, that's the context I need for my future presentation. So just, I think at the end of the day, everyone's working on it's the same project, right? It's the same product that we're all working towards. So we should all be just thinking on the good side of everyone, right? And then just turn those no's into an opportunity where you can reach out and just see if there's a collaboration moment that can spark from there.
Yes. If you guys would love to field a question, we have a good one here from Helen Tay, is it? She asks, I'm currently struggling with emotionalizing the info. I have to contextualize it for my audience. Helen, would you like to come up and just present your scenario and we can kind of run through it with you if you're there? Are you there, Helen? Okay, well, I think there was another one in the meantime, but Helen, you can ping us in the chat if you want to come up and ask your question. But in the meantime, if anyone has any thoughts about that question, like just emotionalizing the info, maybe I'm getting that maybe it's not connecting with the stakeholders, like they're just kind of hearing it and they're sort of numb to it. Is that maybe what you're having trouble with? Oh, she says, I can't seem to turn my mic on. Okay, let me see if there's anything I can do from here. Do you see that mic icon, Helen? Is it red line through it or is it white? Hopefully should be able to toggle. I don't have it turned off from my end, so.
I think in the meantime, we got that question from ByPie.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that what if I show all the data and resources to the stakeholder, but the stakeholders still want to go for what's in their mind rather than the evidence? What's the way to solve this, and what's the next step? Joy is laughing, so Joy, go for it.
Take it away.
I was like, oh, I know exactly a scenario. That is when an ally could really come in. So for example, if you showed everything, you've done all your due diligence and the stakeholder is just like, nope, I just really want that to be done. This is when you can have a best friend in the engineering department and they can come in and say, you know what, stakeholder, that's a great idea, but that's going to take us 6 months to build versus 3 months of what Joy's proposing. Or you can have a research ally. I think that's one way that I would tackle this, is to really find out, right? Why does the stakeholder want to go in that direction? What's in it for them? Maybe they have their own personal reason too. And if you've done all the things you can by highlighting the risks and just like what expected outcomes, right, from a design point of view and a UX point of view, then maybe like that's all you can do in that moment if they just want to keep going, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like they're signing off on it, but at least you've done your due diligence to tell them why, like the pros and cons of going in that direction versus this other direction.
Yeah, 100%. I think so much of it is just acceptance in the end. Like you can only do so much, but maybe there's something you're missing too. So take that as a note to go back and look at it from their perspective a little bit. Maybe understand maybe maybe it's the money talking, maybe it's the time talking, maybe it's the resources, or maybe it's just kind of like a very generalized opinion about color or something like that. But just, yeah, use it as fuel to dig a little bit deeper for next time, but just remember that it's kind of something we're all contributing to. So compromise is definitely part of it. And I know it's hard sometimes, but it's something that we can all relate to having to go through regularly, I think. So I don't think Helen can quite get the mic on. Thank you all for helping out and giving some tech suggestions here, but we'll just go back to trying to answer it based on what, the context of the question there. But yeah, currently struggling with emotionalizing the info and having to contextualize it for my audience. How would you make this stuff connect more for whoever you're presenting it to? Any thoughts, Joey, on that one?
Yeah, I'm trying to think like around the specific context. I think it is very specific to where you're at and the type of work that you're doing. But the example that I had working with the government was we were coming in to design a new test for people who wanted to become managers in the government, and bringing that problem statement down to, like, here's the root emotion, like here's the root problem, was really helpful. So an example that we would bring up is, like, all of these government employees were very already ingrained in, like, they were psychologists. They're like, we want to make this super complex test so that people can't cheat, and like all of these things. And it's like, okay, let's think about the last time you got tested. Let's think about the job application experience. Do you remember when you were in high school and like you got back like, like your test? There's a lot of feelings, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of like negative emotions associated with this specific process of applying for a job, taking this test, applying to be a manager in the government, and like bringing people back down to like empathizing and doing empathy activities, I find has been really helpful in that sort of context.
Yeah, I like that. And again, sometimes simple analogies, again, will help, just bringing it to a place where it's something that they can really relate to, that's very relevant to them. It will hit that emotional note if you can figure out what that note is. That's a good way to do it as well. Yeah, sorry, Helen. Yeah, I see that the user experience here is not that great. It won't let me give permission and won't let you get permission. So hopefully that answered your question to a degree. And yes, Zayada recommended the book Articulating Design Decisions. This is a very, very good book. I highly recommend it as well if you haven't read it and you're struggling in this area. It's a lot of good information and a good deep dive. Okay, so let's see. Have we answered all the questions so far?
Yep, in the chat.
Right, okay. So next question for the panel is a little bit about, well, one more thing that I'd like to mention as well in terms of presenting is always having kind of that elevator pitch ready at each kind of level. Having some small sentence that's very easy, or like an analogy to kind of describe to people before you go down explaining too much is always great, because like Federico said, sometimes you need to field questions along the way to know where you want to expand out on, and progressively disclosing what everyone needs to hear. And so having those little stories ready, having those things prepared ahead of time. I think preparation and rehearsal for me has been really important. If it's a pretty big presentation, I do like to kind of run through it ahead of time, and have different decks or maybe slightly different presentations ready depending who I'm talking to. And if you're up against those type of people that are very resistant, you might have to do a little extra work there, a little extra research on the data that's important to them and that sort of thing. So, but it may not be relevant for everyone. So I think that's it's also important to do. So I think the final question here is, how do you know when you get it right? How do you know when you're kind of getting a good reception, when you kind of felt like you've done a good job, or what's the goal really in presenting this stuff, would you all say?
The short answer is getting an ally out of it. And like the best feeling I get from from the beginning of having like a very stubborn or like a very resistant stakeholders, by the end they say, yep, like this is the way to go, all of it makes sense, and they give that big check mark. I often find that like throughout the process you would have integrated, like you would have like had to convince them along the way and help them understand, this is why we're doing it, this is why it's valuable. And if they see the value in it, they will become an ally at the end, and also be able to speak to your designs and your decisions, not to like an extreme degree, but to other stakeholders as well. And having that is so powerful.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think just paying attention to the dynamics of the relationships that you're in, the team dynamics, that chain of perceived command of influence is very important throughout the whole process, because you definitely, I think when we go into it, we tend to feel like we're sort of up against this team or up against other people, but really, I don't think it's that. I think that you're really up against the risk aversion of the person who feels the most ownership over the decision, right? There's some risk that they're perceiving. There's some value that they don't feel like they're getting from what you're presenting. So digging into what that is behind what the person is saying, even if they're being very, even if they're shutting down your ideas, even if they're suggesting absolutely ridiculous seeming things, just keep that in mind, that there's some risk that they're perceiving, there's some overwhelm that they're having that you might not be getting through. And I think it's really about setting that vision, and being able to sell that vision. Like, what is this? If we get this right, what does that mean? Right? If you guys want to talk a little bit more about that, like when you actually present something and it, how do you kind of bring everyone on board and rally everyone and say, this is the vision, and if we get this right, this will happen type of talk?
I can start there. A lot of my past projects revolves around, yes, like setting a vision, right? And I think that is so important, not just in this talk, but just in general. How do you perceive a design, right? Like a design is not just a single page on a website and then you just sign off on it and build it. It's more like, how do you look at the long-term evolution of that feature that lives on this page? What are some of the hidden context? What are some of the values from this page, right? Like, how does this thing influence other decisions you're making throughout the product, right? So a lot of times what I love to do is always having a North Star vision on where you're trying to go. Then once you sell people on that vision, you can take a step back and say, okay, this is my MVP, right? We know we have technical and budget constraints and this is what we can deliver, but this is where we're heading towards. And then you can bring everyone in that journey, and then everyone's working towards this goalpost. And I think that's so important because this will help you so much with your engineering talk, right? Because we all know we can only deliver so much, right? If you're doing a agile development, then you know exactly how to break that down, right? And then you can even build out different versions of your prototypes to say, okay, this is the end goal, but here's version 1, version 2, version 3. Then you have this visual storytelling tool to help you sell that overall experience. And I think that's really important. And then how do you know when you will know when you get this wrong is when you're stuck in multiple stakeholder meetings and the meetings just keep going forever and ever. So I think you will know when something is not right, then you will tweak your presentation to make it better next time.
Yeah, that's so true. You will know when you get it wrong. And Joey, yeah, I love what you were saying in the chat as well. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I was just like inspired by your point in the chat, which is really at the end of the day, you are working together, like even if you're on different teams, building better products, building better services for the people that you're serving. And so, yeah, if there is resistance, if there's anything that's holding the person back, it's not an us versus them sort of thing. It comes down to, okay, how can we work together better? Like, how can we work towards like collaborating or building a better product for our customers, for our users, and maybe the things that are like holding the stakeholder back or holding the other person back are things that they feel they're not seeing being delivered. And so it just opens the floor for conversation and having this become open collaboration and open conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I mean, so much of what we experience and, feeling like, as they say, we don't have a seat at the table and those sorts of things. I think a lot of that can be mitigated if you also realize that being perceived a certain way or having more influence is not so much about having, all of the answers, but being able to really thoughtfully ask a lot of the right questions to get more clarity, to probe down into the core of what is causing, the presentation to maybe not be received the way you expected, and to understand why. I mean, Socratic questioning is a great way as well. You know, there's questions for clarification. There's questions that probe assumptions. There's questions that probe reason and evidence. And sometimes these are different ways of questioning people. So, you know, as we talked about, you can say, do you have an example of sites that perform well in this KPI that are not this example that I've just presented to you? And again, be open to being wrong about it, but also maybe they will not have an example and then they'll just have to accept yours. You know, you can say things like, can you explain why it would be beneficial to do it this way? And who do you think would benefit most from that? Because that could illuminate whether or not they are user-centered in their thinking, which is, you know, our job in UX is to be those user advocates, or if maybe this is a business decision and they're thinking, well, you know, this is a number that we need to hit for this month or whatever it is. And so that way you can frame your presentation differently or pull out different important things from it. So, I think there's a whole topic on defending your design decisions, or, you know, getting buy-in afterwards when you get feedback and all that kind of stuff that we can go into in another workshop. But definitely leave some more of your questions here. We're going to jump into Q&A soon, and we're going to follow this up with a survey as well, so that for our other workshops, you can ask those questions and we can do a little bit more role playing or things like that, and, you know, fill in some of those blanks for you. So anything else at this stage about, you know, just presenting your work that you guys would like to cover or to?
I wanted to add like 2 quick things. The first one is, especially if you do work in an agile environment, you can be the designer, but it doesn't mean that everything is on you to get fixed in the fastest way possible. You can play it back to your stakeholders. Like engineers can take time to do something, and design takes time as well, right? So you don't have to feel like you have to rush. In an agile environment, if people really believe in agile, it's all about delivering those features in the shortest amount of time. But people do not believe in hard due
Why is
dates.
his audio so low?
I think, Kelly, can you go on mute? Because we cannot. Thank you. So that is one approach that you can use, and having an understand, almost playing it back to the stakeholders of, okay, we can totally make this change. This will probably take me 3 days, right? Even just voice that out, it will put yourself in a different position. It will make yourself even more respectful to some extent, because you know and you own the time it will take to make a change that somebody is asking you. And that is very important. And as you process in your career, it's something that you need to be able to do. Understand how long a change will take, and you can play it back to your stakeholders so they understand it. And the other point that I wanted to make is, I do believe that you have to go big and go with the vision and then sell them to the MVP, but it's also true the other way around. So when you get into a conversation with your stakeholder, be prepared to win the battle, not to win the war. Most of the time you want to go in and get, like, again, that check mark on everything you do. Forget about it. Make sure that you win the tactical battle, or you advance in those that are functional for you to get things done. So that is the thing that you want to focus on, and make sure that you got those right. And eventually.
Yeah, that's really important, you know, and it really is about a little bit of the strategy. And over time, with more experience, you start to be able to measure how long things take you, how much effort is involved. There are different models that you can use for this, like prioritization models, like the Kano model and things like that, to help you say, okay, you know, this requires more effort, but will benefit us more in the short term, or this requires the least amount of effort and will benefit us most in the short term. And so those will help you decide what you should fight the battle for, and how to prioritize. And I think that's definitely such good advice from Fede. And just also the agile environment. I mean, most startups, most big enterprise companies, they're working with this model. And generally how, you know, you describe that is you build something and then you figure out if it works. And then, you know, you push it and you figure out if the users want it. So to them, we're a little bit backwards, because we're trying to figure out if our users want this first before we invest in building it. But you have to always keep that in mind, that for an engineer, they can code something in like 3 minutes without doing all this hypothetical research and make-believe personas that they feel are kind of a bit fluffy. So it has to make value sense to them, and you have to say, I promise you, I can reduce your backlog and all of your bugs in that backlog if we test this first. You will not be stuck with thousands and thousands of bugs that you have to fix after this breaks for a user and we lose them for life and we lose that customer. So that's the value, right? And that's the value that I think Fedi is saying, like, win that battle, be tactical. Yeah, what do you gals think about that?
Totally, completely agree. I also want to add a note that, let's say you are junior designer, you're starting out, right? Like, presentation skill is not something they teach you at school, right? I think at your work, if you know someone who's really good at presenting, ask if you can shadow in their meeting. Just be a fly on the wall and observe and just see how they do their storytelling. See how do they get their point across, and then maybe just take notes. And maybe if you're presenting for the first time, right, or the first few times, ask someone in the room, maybe it's your manager, maybe it's your peer, to take notes on your presentation skill. And then maybe you can do a little review afterward to see how you did. And maybe if there's a couple points that you didn't get across, then you can understand and have those shower thoughts on, oh, how can I be better next time?
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce off of that. I think like taking in feedback is also a really great way to help improve on the way that you present as well. And that's something that I get to do a lot at work, where before like a big stakeholder presentation, like I'll have my draft slides ready and I'll reach out to like one of my colleagues, like, hey Ryan, are you free for a chat? Like, let me present this thing to you. And as I'm going through it, I'll realize, oh wait, no, that it might not make sense the way that I'm doing it now. Something that also is helpful if you don't have like someone else immediately to present to is recording yourself. And as much as I hate like playing back a recording, it truly does help to watch the way that you present things and reevaluate from there. And yeah, if you can do that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's something that I do a lot and have done, recorded myself before presentations, because it's just really different when you run through it and when you can also see yourself back and then how you're, showing up. It can be very different than what you think is happening. And like just in general, I like to come into the presentations, just kind of set that intention before, just remind myself of those things. Like, this is a team effort. I'm not defending myself here. I'm just inviting us all to come up with the best possible solution, right? Do a body check, get out of your head, come into your body, take some deep breaths, right? Get in there and read the room, feel the energy, like code switch when you need to. These are little things about presenting that I think are the nuances that you learn from doing it and from rehearsing and from recording yourself and that sort of thing. So in the last few minutes here, why don't we see if anyone wants to come up and present a scenario if they're able to unmute and everything. I know a lot of people were able to kind of access their mic. So if anyone has any questions.
We have one more question in chat from Amy. Does this process translate if there isn't a designer in the C-suite or even director level?
What process would you be referring to, Amy, just in particular?
Can you hear me? I'm off mute.
Yeah. Hi, Amy.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just pertaining to any kind of like starting a project or getting, just like even reevaluating an existing project. In my experience, I'm just on the lowest level tier, and then there's no other designers that are director, manager level, even in the C-suite. So how do I take it to, a director who's not a designer, I guess? Like the process specifically of like, can we get this project going? Or what do we think about adding this to an existing product? Or just that whole process.
So kind of making suggestions about changes more so?
Suggestions, yes, I would love that. I in particular am looking at, I would love to start a new project. So yeah, either or, really.
Yeah. Does anyone want to take that?
I would say that even if you're not, if I got it right, and correct me if I'm not, like I am, if it doesn't answer your question, but even if you don't have a counterpart that is more senior than you, and you're the only one taking care of that area of the business, that's the person they have to respect. And you are the person that is doing that job and provided the best solution to that problem. It doesn't matter if it doesn't scale up to the director. You probably have a security question or a financial question if you're not expert, right? So you will trust the people in cybersecurity or the people in finance to do that. So I think the process scale up the same way, if that was the question. You just have to be confident and structured in the way you work.
Yeah, I think I don't think much of who you're presenting this to matters as long as you know their value language and what is going to be worth them investing in this, right? Again, I use that word de-risking their design investment because they are investing in you for a certain reason. And mostly, I'm sure that's to make a better product that sells better and that does better in the market. And if you understand the points of why a new idea, a new suggestion, a change will do that, and you can speak to that convincingly, and it may take you proving yourself on different levels over time if you're just kind of getting into things for the first time. And you know, it's just like if I'm reaching out to someone for a collaboration or something, I don't usually just cold reach out to someone. I will talk to them beforehand. You know, I will try to understand the problems that they're facing personally, like in the business or, you know, whoever it is that you're presenting to, or what frictions they're feeling with the products, and then just talk to them about it. Again, those questions are really great, and doing little prototypes for your idea, it's always good. Like Joy said, like being able to just build something really quickly is the value that we can provide. And I think that's very helpful. So if I was in that position and I had an idea, I would just create something real quick. I would do a little like sketched out wireframe and tie it together as a prototype in Figma and say, and get some data around it, do your research, understand the value language that they're speaking, and say, hey, you know, I think we could really improve conversions if we changed this. And here's what I have to show you around that. And it could look like this. So painting that whole picture, I think even if you don't have any designers, that's just a matter of understanding who you're talking to. So hopefully that makes sense. And I kind of hit what you're talking about there.
Yes, that all made perfect sense and was really helpful. So thank you both.
Absolutely. So Brian asks, can I ask if there is any tip to balance design workshop versus actual design? Like in terms of time management, since preparing and delivering presentations could be time consuming. Yeah, to just kick that off, I want to say that one of those I wish I knew when I got into design is that first thing that I was saying is that probably more of our work is around this presenting stuff than actual designing. Like if I calculated the amount of hours that I was actually drawing boxes versus like making, you know, like preparing myself to tell people why I should be able to make these boxes, that's like so much more of my work. And I think we don't realize how much time that takes. And for me, I am very much about systemizing things. So I have a Figma deck that is a blank template that I can fire up every single time with these things. And I have notes in Notion. I have a workspace in Notion for UI, UX, and product designers, which is actually available if you guys want it. I'll leave the link in the description to keep all of this stuff organized. So before a meeting, I go through this checklist, right, that I've done before. And I say, okay, I make sure I do this. Have I done this? Have I back channeled someone about it? Do I have an ally that I can talk to about this? And in the beginning, it takes some upfront investment of time to set up. But if you do that, you will notice over time that the next time you take much less time preparing, and the next time and the next time, because you have these templates and tools like ready to go. So I think that's like a workflow thing and how you can optimize that. But that's something that's really been helpful for me. How about you guys in terms of your workflow and time management around this stuff?
I love templates too. And I think especially now that everyone's working remotely and we're all working on our computers, co-creation is a great way to get buy-ins, right? Like don't just do a design workshop with yourself and other fellow designers. Get those stakeholders into the workshop with you and co-create with them, so they're also contributing to the end result, because in that moment you already gotten their buy-in, right? Because it's kind of their ideas too now. And what I love to do is just always like spin up a mural board, right? Like as we're just talking about ideas, I just open up mural boards, share my screen, I just started throwing boxes around, and then at the end of the meeting, hopefully we got some really rough wireframes, but everyone's already sold on the idea, right? Then they can just take that mural board and start sharing it with their peers, right? Whether it's the business team, marketing team, whatever other teams it may be. And then that saves your actual design time now, right? Because everyone's building consensus around that concept. So I would say definitely try that. Do some just impromptu wireframes. That it always works. And then everyone gets really excited because they're seeing their conversation coming alive.
Yeah, I like that. Like, instead of worrying about preparing presentations, just design more and put them together and show everyone. How about you, Joey? How do you manage your time with this stuff?
Yeah, so I think both you, Elizabeth, and Joy have kind of like touched around optimizing your process where you can. But this was actually something I ran into a few months ago where I was working on a project and I could have done it like one of two ways. So like one, like either just like gone ahead and wireframed everything, designed everything on my own, or the other part was to have these workshops and like integrate the team in it and stakeholders in it. And I ended up going the latter route because I had found, oh, like design was something that was like very new to this team. And so there was like, I knew that buy-in was something that I would have to work on later in the process. So instead of pushing it back to later, bringing it up front. And I remember going to my design director at the time and saying, oh, it's been 3 weeks and I feel like I haven't designed anything. I've just been hosting these like hour workshops. And he said, you know what, like to be honest, like that is what like designers do. Like as you elevate yourself from like junior to intermediate to senior, you will find that you are doing this a lot more. And it is more important that you are bringing people along the way. And the way that you're doing it now, instead of wireframing it yourself, will be helpful in the long run, even if you feel like it's like a little bit hard right now. And so I kind of like took that, and at the end of that project, I actually did get a lot of like allies and stakeholder buy-in throughout the process that I think would have been harder had I gone the first route and done everything myself and then brought them in at the end. So I understand like the anxiety around balancing time, but I do think that if you can do it, if you can collaborate, co-design and bring people into the process, at the end of the day, it only makes like the team stronger and it only makes your design stronger.
Yeah, I love that. I think co-designing, paired with drip irrigation, you're not in for any huge surprises in your presentation, right? And it becomes like this, aggregate of everything you all have worked on, right? And you feel a lot less alone in the process. So I think that's really important. And just in general, like something that I always do is I have a work journal. So when I'm working on something, while I'm in the trenches of doing it, and I'm going through my own random thought processes, I'm writing that down for I'll take 5 minutes at the end of the day and say, well, this is the struggle that I had talking to users. These are some of the things that I'm grappling with. And what happens is at the end, in hindsight, it's a lot harder to bring people into that struggle and that process. But if you can actually go back when you were experiencing it, it's that process of really making our internal thoughts and experiences externalized for other people. That's what presenting is really all about. And then all of the data that you've put together. So sometimes it helps to just, keep lots of notes inside of your, project management system along the way so that it feels fresh and relevant when you're presenting it, when it comes time to present it. All right, so any other questions? I have one here from Upala. Hope I'm saying that right. How to bring stakeholder PMs, devs on the same page when everyone have different perspectives towards a certain design. Anyone want to talk about that a little bit? I know we covered some of that earlier in the talk as well.
I would ask questions on why do everyone have different perspectives right now, right? And maybe just start from different groups, right? You can even have one-on-ones with these people and say like, hey, PMs, like, what do you think of this design? And really understand where their perspectives are coming from, right? Is it just we're not aligned on our target audience? Is it because like there are too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Maybe like this project has a really high visibility and high investment, so everyone wants to get a little bit in there, right? Like that could be some office politics involved, right? It's like just understanding why that is and how do you solve that from a experience perspective. Maybe you can convince them from the end user perspective, right? And say, look, well, at the end of the day, none of you are users, right? Even we're not users as designers, right? And then you can maybe start there.
Yeah, I think there's that empathy piece, and that comes through the storytelling of how you can take it upon yourself to figure out their perspective very clearly. You can't bring them on the same page if you don't clearly understand it. If a dev is resistant, then it is probably because they are stressed with a bunch of changes. They have a backlog that goes on for days that they can't even catch up with. And the last thing they want to hear is a designer is coming in here telling them they have to make another change when they haven't even finished the last 25,000 changes that they have, right? So if you can understand that, I think it changes the way you approach your designs. And if a PM is getting pressured from, the C-suite team to show numbers in a certain area, and, I've seen this happen so many times in the startups that I've worked at, that pressure, especially if you're in that fast-paced environment, can make you make some less than ethical choices. It's like, do you sell a bit of your user data, or do you use some dark designs to increase sales or increase conversions? Or do you take a user-centered approach that could take an extra amount of time, extra developer resources to implement? And you have to explain why in the long term, there's more value in the user experience than in these shortcuts. So sometimes you really have to get good at framing long-term values versus short-term goals. Because a lot of the stuff that we do as user experience designers, they take a while to come to fruition. It's not a quick feature that you can just build and then see, and then, you feel like you've checked something off. So I think that's pretty important to kind of set that long-term vision and what we were talking about. So yeah, like Joey said, ask enough questions, get enough clarity about it so that you really do understand the perspective, and then address it and figure out what's important to everyone, and put it together on the same page.
If I can add one thing, is because I really want to stress this one. I hear a lot, especially in the mentoring session, the one-on-ones, of this situation of the design should be brought to the table, or even this kind of like situation in which the designer don't so much because they're not understood, but then everyone seems to be entitled to have design opinion, right? Like when nobody has tech opinion or nobody has, again, financial opinion on those data. That's totally fine, it's the nature of our job. But on the designer side, let's start recognizing that that's our job, and we're just contributor to the cause. We are not the one that will need to be blamed if something doesn't work, or we don't have to take over everything. As I said, related to the Agile, it takes a village, right? And it's a combination of all the people that are making the recipe a success. So don't overstress about your role as a designer. Know that you have your value, you have your task, your roles are your responsibility in that hypothetical race that you're building. You're one part of the equation. So don't stress it too much. Do very, very honest with yourself and know that everyone is there to help you up and lift you up. You're not there because you are going to be like blamed if something doesn't work. Because sometimes we do end up in thinking about that, and it's very dangerous. And we got into imposter syndrome and a lot of other stuff that we shouldn't fall into. So my last suggestion would be more than counter any ideas that you have. And if they don't do it, it's a toxic environment, change work. You don't deserve a toxic environment. Nobody does.
That's it right there. I mean, we can't change the culture at some of these companies alone. That is embedded in that. It will take more than just us, you know, in 1 or 2 presentations. But like Joy said, this is really important as an answer to Daniel's question. He says, what are good reasons against dark practices? How do you convince business people when everyone seems to be doing it? And Helen, I don't know if you know, you're in the presence of Fede, but this comment made me laugh because yes, but Joy says, explain the consequences. What were you going to say, Fede?
I say I love it. I always care about like candor and honesty. So yeah, bring it on.
Thankfully, we have Fede in working, designers like this working in Facebook. And remember, this is a much bigger machine than we can ever understand. And there are always trade-offs. Anyone that thinks we can design without dark practices, I always say that we have a very anthropocentric view of the world, right? We really do think that the way humans do things in general, the way it should be done, and the conveniences and this sort of thing, and that alone is something we have to accept, that no matter what we're doing, we are causing harm in some way, in some, you know, way in the future, or some unforeseen way. Something that we are doing has a cause and effect and a consequence. So there's no perfect, you know, non-dark design practices, but, you know, we can do the best that we can to see our biases, address them, have these open conversations, and contribute to changing the culture by showing up. And you know, in the best way that we can as ourselves, right? So I think, like Joy said, explain the consequences of dark practices and cutting corners. Most often you lose users' trust and they never come back. Can you expand on that a little bit, Joy?
Yeah, I think, you know, like everyone, all the stakeholders, right, have a mission in mind. And I think for us, like Elizabeth, you're saying, right, we're kind of the gatekeeper of the overall experience, right? So sometimes when push comes to shove, maybe there are some corners that people want to cut, right? Like it could be we were running out of bandwidth, we can't do accessibility, or we really need to boost that sign up rate, so let's get rid of the unsubscribe button, right? Like just really figuring out, right? Like you're kind of the defender for your users, and is that a good decision in that moment? Right? And then is everyone okay on that decision, right? And then I think it's more calling that out. You don't have to be making that decision yourself, but just making sure all the team, everyone involved understands what's going on.
Yeah, and I think something that always helps me in these presentations is just the repeat back method. Whenever something like that is said, you call it out, you be an advocate, and then you repeat it back and say, so I want to be clear right now that we are choosing to do this instead of this, and this could have this consequence. Are we all clear on that? Yes. And if they can say it out loud and repeat that and be confident and okay in their ethical choice there, you might want to find another job if it's something unscrupulous. If not, then maybe they will go home and think about that. And maybe, you know, at least you planted a seed there, right? While you, you know, look for another job. But that's the best we can do, I think. So I guess, you know, we've gone a bit over here. I don't know if there were any more questions. Daniel, one more. I'm torn when big businesses, whether Meta or Booking.com, are doing it. Talking about trust and user loss is a difficult point to make. Yeah, I mean, you know, when big companies are doing it, I think a lot of us don't realize the little lesser of two evils decisions that have to happen, the trade-offs that have to happen when you are that big. And hopefully transparency is at the core of their mission as a company. And even if they do have to do something that maybe breaks user trust, at least if they can be open and honest about why they're doing it and why this is the trade-off and this is the case, maybe that's the best that we can hope for. What do you guys think? Another question from Brian. Any suggestions on showing stakeholders that we designers embrace the project while keeping a part of you, like our aesthetics or any design expertise, which seem like what we're paid to do? Anyone want to take that?
Sorry, I think since we're quite a bit over time, I'm wondering if maybe we should field some of these questions, and we can, anyone, like, feel free to connect with us afterwards, and we can address some of those.
Yeah, good idea. All right, so guys, some of the takeaways from the talk today are about this. It's framing your meeting to define outcomes and expectations, expressing the type of feedback you're looking for and from whom. Like Fede has said before, don't ask the accounting department for design feedback and don't take it very seriously when they give it to you. You want to be clear about that. Drip irrigate, as Joy has said, just kind of make sure that you're sharing little things along the way and bringing people into the fold as you go. Speak their language, right? Go to the core of what is important to them and what they value and frame your designs in that way. Provide context, simplify and remove the jargon. You can do that by using analogies or just spinning up wireframe prototypes very quickly to visually show them. Progressively disclose, right? So have those elevator pitches ready and just explain deeper if you need to who you need to. Set the vision, right? If we get this right, if we do this right for our users, we do right by our users, this is what this could mean for our product. And then how will we know if we're right? Think about that and present that question to them so that you guys can measure later and adjust. So thank you all so much. Really thank you to the three of you for coming on and talking through all of this stuff. And again, we're going to send out a survey, and there's a question in there that you can answer with these questions we might have missed, and then we can get back to you or we can form another workshop later. And I will also send out an email to all of the attendees later with some of the things we talked about, like the books and the templates and things like that. So yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Everyone, have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
You connect with us online. You can check out our ADP list profiles for links of how to connect with us on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Good night.
Do the survey. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.